Hi, welcome to week 5. By now, you will have presumably turned in your first essay. I'm curious to know how that goes. I have not sat down to grade any of them yet. I've peeked. I peeked a little bit on Friday and then again yesterday, Sunday afternoon, but I have not sat down to grade them. So I'm curious to know how you did on that and how it felt to do that, how to engage in research on a topic of religious and social and historical nature. I saw that a lot of you were kind of coming at it from different angles. Some of you were focusing more on the spiritual aspects, some historical, some cultural. So I think I've said this previously. I'm always really curious and interested to know what kind of essays turn up in this class, and I'm still curious right now. Let's dive in. So right now, this week, what you're looking at is what is called the intertestamental period. And so the sacred texts that are on your docket are going to be apocryphal in nature, meaning that they are non-canonical or deuterocanonical. There are a lot of words that we can use to describe this based off of our faith tradition. All of them essentially mean the same thing, that these are texts that were rejected by various councils, cultures, for a number of reasons. Primarily, and this is kind of like a big umbrella here, primarily most of the people who would have rejected the apocryphal literature, or what is known as the Apocrypha, did so because they did not feel as though it was cohesive, coherent. It did not really match up with some of the other religious ideas that are presented in the Bible. And every time that I say that, I think that that's kind of ironic and curious because there's so much in the Bible that contradicts itself. Like, why did you reject these books? For example, Maccabees. First and second Maccabees pretty much is like front and center with the apocryphal literature. Third and fourth Maccabees is more highly debated. But first, second, third, and fourth Maccabees are all studied in Jewish seminaries. And a lot of Christians don't know that. They reject the Apocrypha because they've been told to reject it because their Bible is not printed with the Apocrypha, and they say, well, this stuff is not important. Well, for the Jewish people today in 2025, they are still studying this, and they've been studying it for hundreds of years. So that's curious. Some of the stuff that is appearing in Maccabees is studied in Jewish communities because it is so historical and helps to reconstruct what was happening around the pivot point in history, that Christians would kind of date their calendar in one way, and Jews are still dating their calendars in different ways, but they pay attention to what was happening around this period that is called the Second Temple period, leading up to 70 CE and the years that followed, for a number of reasons. One, because it reveals so much about what was happening with the destruction and the rebuilding of their temple, and then once that temple is rebuilt, why it was destroyed again. They also pay attention to it for folklore. The Jewish community continues to collect folklore and folk stories about what's called the diaspora, or all of these religious communities that are kind of living abroad, not in Israel, not in Jerusalem, but kind of scattered throughout the world. And so they still tend to collect these stories about what is happening within their own religious tradition and cultural tradition. And the Apocrypha, specifically looking at 1st through 4th Maccabees, something that they continue to pay attention to even today in 2025. Another book that I find curious why it was rejected is the Book of Tobit, which is very supernatural in nature. But if you were to present the Book of Tobit, like if we were to sit down together over coffee or over a meal and you were to say, man, let me tell you about this story, and I were to tell you that story, you would say, oh man, that sounds like something that happened to my uncle or something that happened to my aunt. There are so many things that are happening in that story that are magical in nature, but would in 2025 sound like, oh man, that is a family that really believes God. They believe in miracles. They believe in not just fate and circumstance, but that God is ordaining things happening. And at the end of the day, Tobit is a great love story. A lot of people in their marriage ceremonies are quoting from the Book of Tobit without even recognizing that that's what they're doing. So the Book of Tobit, though it is not part of the Protestant Bible, is still very much alive and well in 2025. And then we have these other traditions that are taking place in the apocryphal texts like Bel and the Dragon and the story of Susanna. And in these, I think that the reason why these were rejected more than any other reason, I think that these stories were rejected because they are elevating the role of women in religious communities. And for a number of reasons, religious communities have not just Christianity, not just Judaism, but religion in general has broadly tried to suppress the role of women as leaders and tried to rewrite their stories to erase women. And I think that specifically the story of Susanna, Bel and the Dragon, and all of these other stories that are very affirming, the Book of Judith, all of these stories that are very affirming of women are erased not because they don't match up with what's in the Bible, but because there are social and cultural reasons why they were rejected. So we have these apocryphal legends that are collected together in the Catholic Bible, and in the Episcopal Bible you will find these apocryphal the Apocrypha or the Deuterocanonical books, but there are all kinds of other books that exist, all kinds of other legends that were rejected for a number of reasons. More than any other reason, these stories are denied from the canon. They're denied from the Hebrew Bible or the Christian scriptures because they're just so short. There's just not enough substance for them to remain in the canon, and so they're set aside. Here, too, I find this very curious, since if you are looking at the Protestant Bible or the Catholic Bible, and you get to the back end of the Christian scriptures, you have these epistles like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and 3rd John is basically like 2 paragraphs. I mean, it is not remarkable at all. The book of Jude is at best half a page. Like if I were to put that in a word processor, just like copy and paste it into a word processor, we're looking at about half a page. This is stuff that like you could finish the entire book in probably under 5 minutes. So these reasons that we have historically, faith communities have historically rejected the apocryphal legends because they're just so short, or because they don't affirm some of the social or cultural reasons that we want to support male leadership. All of these are very suspect and something that we should definitely scrutinize. So in the next video, what I'd like us to do is I would like us to try and reconstruct, kind of rewind the tape into this period of silence. So much of what we talk about when we talk about the Apocrypha has been ignored, has been erased, has been set aside. And so we want to kind of acknowledge that, and then we want to rewind the tape to this period of silence when no prophet is speaking, and we want to kind of understand, well, why were they rejecting these texts? What was happening? You could say that God was silent for 400 years. That just does not match up with the literature. That definitely doesn't match up with historical records. So what are we talking about? So in our next video, what we want to do is we want to rewind the tape to the end of the First Temple and that prophetic literature that is being written with the destruction of the First Temple. And then we want to move forward into the construction of the Second Temple and what is often in biblical studies called the Second Temple period.